it's crazy to see, you see clear skies ahead, but you know that that airspace there is in Ukraine, and there's war raging. You know, Ukraine is at war with Russia.
The world watches as a tragedy unfolds in Ukraine, a human crisis that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our world. The conflict in Ukraine has shaken the foundations of the international order, exposing the fragility of peace and the deep divisions within the international community. The war in Ukraine forces us to grapple with fundamental philosophical questions about war, justice, and the very nature of humanity. The clash of arms in Ukraine leads us to just war theory, a framework that continues to challenge us to think critically about the use of force and the pursuit of peace. The principle of just cause in just war theory hinges on the legitimacy of Russia's invasion and Ukraine's subsequent resistance. Just war theory mandates that the use of force must be proportionate to the threat faced and pursued only after all peaceful alternatives have been exhausted. At the heart of the conflict in Ukraine lies a fundamental tension between competing claims of sovereignty and self-determination. The conflict in Ukraine is deeply rooted in a complex web of history, culture, and geopolitics, with both Russia and Ukraine asserting their own distinct national identities. The war in Ukraine raises profound questions about the right of a nation to choose its own alliances and to determine its own future. The international community grapples with the moral question of whether it has a duty to intervene in Ukraine to protect innocent lives, invoking the principle of responsibility to protect R2P. The decision to intervene in another nation's affairs is rarely straightforward. It presents a tangled web of ethical, legal, and strategic considerations. In Ukraine, proponents argue intervention is necessary due to human suffering and crimes. Critics warn of escalation and a potential wider conflict with Russia. They advocate for humanitarian aid and diplomatic pressure instead. The dilemmas of intervention highlight the clash between protecting human rights and state sovereignty. While the debate over direct military intervention rages on, the international community cannot ignore the human cost of inaction. Every day that the conflict continues, more lives are lost, more families are torn apart, and more of Ukraine's cultural heritage is reduced to rubble. The moral burden of witnessing such suffering without taking decisive action weighs heavily on the conscience of nations and individuals alike. The consequences of inaction extend far beyond the immediate borders of Ukraine. The war has already had a devastating impact on the global economy, disrupting supply chains, fueling inflation, and exacerbating food insecurity in vulnerable regions. The longer the conflict drags on, the more profound and far-reaching these consequences will become, potentially leading to social unrest, political instability, and a further erosion of the rules-based international order. Moreover, inaction risks emboldening other authoritarian leaders who may see an opportunity to advance their own territorial ambitions through force, further destabilizing the international system. The message sent by failing to effectively confront aggression in Ukraine could have ripple effects across the globe, undermining the very foundations of peace and security. In weighing the costs of inaction, the international community must move beyond narrow self-interest and embrace a more expansive understanding of global security and shared responsibility. The crisis in Ukraine is not just a regional conflict, it is a test of the world's commitment to upholding the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and human dignity. War, in its brutal reality, presents a profound moral challenge not only to nations, but also to the individuals who wage it. Soldiers on the front lines, often young and thrust into unimaginable circumstances, face a daily struggle to reconcile the demands of duty with the dictates of conscience. The battlefield can become a crucible where ethical codes forged in peacetime are tested against the harsh realities of survival and the ever-present threat of death. The taking of human life, even in the context of armed conflict, carries a profound psychological and moral weight. Soldiers trained to kill must grapple with the consequences of their actions. The knowledge that they have taken another person's life, often someone not unlike themselves, a father, a son, a brother in arms on the opposing side, this burden of taking life, even when deemed necessary, can leave lasting scars, leading to moral injury, post-traumatic stress, and a profound sense of disillusionment. Moreover, the fog of war often presents situations where the lines between right and wrong, between legitimate targets and innocent civilians, become blurred. The pressure to follow orders, to conform to unit cohesion, and to survive can sometimes cloud moral judgment, leading even the most well-intentioned individuals down a slippery slope of ethical compromise. The ethical challenges of war are not limited to the physical act of fighting. The treatment of prisoners of war, the adherence to international humanitarian law, and the restraint shown in the use of force. These are all moral battlefields where the character of individuals and nations is tested. Section 2. The Civilian Crucible. While soldiers bear the brunt of physical combat, it is often civilians who endure the most profound and enduring suffering in war. Caught in the crossfire, displaced from their homes and subjected to violence and deprivation, civilians become the tragic collateral damage of conflicts waged in the name of ideology, power, or security. The deliberate targeting of civilians, a grave violation of international law, represents a moral nadir in any conflict. Yet history is replete with examples of such atrocities, from the bombing of cities in World War II to the ethnic cleansing campaigns of more recent decades. The war in Ukraine, with its images of bombed-out apartment buildings, hospitals reduced to rubble, and mass graves discovered in liberated towns, serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of civilians in wartime. Beyond the immediate physical harm, civilians in conflict zones also endure psychological trauma, the loss of livelihoods, the separation of families, and the destruction of their communities. The long-term consequences of war, displacement, poverty, and the breakdown of social structures can continue to plague generations long after the guns have fallen silent. The protection of civilians in armed conflict is not merely a legal obligation, it is a moral imperative. Nations engaged in war have a fundamental responsibility to minimize civilian harm, to adhere to the principles of distinction and proportionality, and to ensure that military objectives never overshadow the sanctity of human life. Section 3. The weight of command. The ethical burdens of war extend beyond the battlefield, reaching into the hearts of those making life and death decisions. Leaders must weigh potential benefits against inevitable costs, knowing their decisions have profound consequences. The true measure of leadership lies in upholding values and committing to justice. In the aftermath, moral integrity determines if peace is just and lasting. Section 1. Through the realist lens. A struggle for power. The tragedy in Ukraine reignites a debate in international relations. Realists see it as a power struggle. Nations vie for security and advantage. Russia fears NATO's eastward expansion. Ukraine's fate is shaped by larger powers. The international system struggles to address such conflicts. Diplomacy reflects power dynamics. Seeking harmony amidst chaos. Idealism offers a vision of international relations rooted in cooperation, international law, and shared values. Idealists argue that the international system is not condemned to perpetual conflict. They point to international institutions and democratic values as evidence of progress. The conflict in Ukraine represents a failure to uphold international principles. Russia's invasion violates the UN Charter and undermines international law. Idealists emphasize strengthening international institutions and promoting diplomacy. They argue that global challenges require collective action and cooperation. Diplomacy can bridge divides and pave the way for a more peaceful world. Idealists believe in a world where cooperation trumps conflict and the rule of law prevails. Section 3. Beyond the binary, embracing complexity. The Ukraine conflict defies easy categorization. It is a nuanced situation beyond power politics and idealism. Understanding it requires embracing complexities and multiple perspectives. The conflict is a human tragedy, not just geopolitical maneuvering. It highlights the limitations of realist and idealist paradigms. Moving forward, a nuanced approach is essential. Embrace complexity for peace and understanding. Section 1. Echoes of History, Challenges of Today. As the conflict in Ukraine unfolds, it reminds us that the questions of war and peace, of justice and sovereignty, are as relevant today as ever. The war challenges the international order, exposing the fragility of global norms and the enduring relevance of ethical considerations. Section 2. The unfinished conversation. The war in Ukraine has ignited a global conversation, a necessary and often uncomfortable dialogue about the fundamental principles that underpin the international order and the responsibilities of nations in a world increasingly defined by interconnectedness and shared challenges. This conversation, however, is far from over. It demands our continued attention, our willingness to engage with complexity, and our commitment to seeking solutions that prioritize peace, justice, and human dignity. We must move beyond simplistic narratives, beyond the binary of good versus evil, and embrace the messy realities of international affairs. This requires acknowledging the legitimate security concerns of all parties involved while condemning acts of aggression and holding perpetrators accountable for violations of international law. It demands a commitment to diplomacy, even in the face of setbacks and provocations. Recognizing that dialogue, however difficult, remains the most viable path to a durable peace, the international community must also grapple with the shortcomings of the existing international system, exploring ways to strengthen institutions, to enforce accountability, and to ensure that the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity are not undermined by power politics or historical revisionism. The conversation must extend beyond the halls of power, engaging civil society, academics, religious leaders, and citizens from all walks of life. It is through such broad-based dialogue, through the sharing of perspectives and the pursuit of common ground, that we can hope to build a more peaceful and just world. Section 3. Forging a path forward. The path forward from the current crisis will be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and setbacks. Yet, even amidst the tragedy and uncertainty, there is hope. The global outpouring of support for Ukraine, the courage and resilience of its people, and the renewed focus on the importance of international cooperation offer glimmers of light in a darkening world. The war in Ukraine has reminded us of the interconnectedness of our world, of the shared humanity that binds us together regardless of borders or ideologies. It has also underscored the importance of international law, diplomacy, and collective action in addressing global challenges. Moving forward, we must seize this moment as an opportunity to build a more peaceful and just world order. This requires investing in diplomacy, strengthening international institutions, upholding the rule of law, and promoting a culture of peace and understanding. The war in Ukraine has been a tragedy, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the fragility of peace. Yet it can also serve as a catalyst for positive change, a call to action for all who believe in a world where dialogue triumphs over violence, where cooperation prevails over conflict, and where the principles of justice and human dignity are upheld for all. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.